So, hey everyone, a big thank you for joining this new episode of Balancing Acts. So, Balancing Acts are brought to you by Forging People, my business, and all we are doing is providing a three-way conversation on a really niche topic or a really important theme. And today is really, really important because actually the subjectivity of it, and we're going to get into that as well. So, loneliness, isolation, and happiness. And I am joined by two amazing fellows. I have Arjuna and Andy, and both will introduce themselves very shortly. Big thanks to them for being here today. For those I haven't met yet, my name is Nick Elston. I'm an inspirational speaker on the lived experience of mental health. It is a proper job, I guarantee you. It's been my job for 10 years. And also a transformational speaking coach. So it's not presentation skills, as you're about to bear witness to. It's about changing our narrative to change our experience. And the themes that we're talking about today actually have a huge impact on things like self-esteem, on confidence, and our ability to step up in any given aspect. So I'm really fascinated to dig into this myself. Because my experiences are purely from lived experience, and namely mental illness, obsessive compulsive disorder, and as I got older in life, it morphed into something called generalized anxiety disorder. I had a breakdown in 2012, and started to use speaking as a therapy, and then it got out of hand and became my career. But because I do purely speak from lived experience, I make sure I surround myself with amazing people that actually know their stuff, experts, specialists, speakers, and influencers. Ethically, morally, and for insurance purposes, I surround myself with amazing people. But Forging People actually came from a line in one of my early talks that in life we can either allow our adversities and our challenges and all the stuff that we experience in life to negatively impact us for the rest of our days, or maybe we can choose for those things to forge something better, to forge something beautiful, to forge something powerful, something that wouldn't have existed without you going through your stuff in the first place. And to me, that's kind of where it starts to make sense. And we do this in lots of different spaces, not just in organizations, but also in frontline environments. I work a lot with the media, both in the US and Canada, and also in Europe and the UK, also through to the emergency services. And also, I coach prisoners' public speaking skills as a transformational tool. I do believe in transformation through speaking. You change your narrative and you change your experience. Really excited to bring some of that into the conversation today as well. How I do this today is I act as kind of like a podcast host and I throw questions to both of my guests. I've tried to be as human, and everyone has like a bullet point with just one line of what we're going to talk about, and we're going to go wherever we want with this. I want it to be a human experience in that sense, because that's kind of how I built my career as a speaker, is to give people the unfiltered truth, how things feel, not necessarily how things are in that sense. And also, if I ever get to release a country music album, this is going to be my cover. We'll get there, maybe. Who knows? But first up, we have Arjuna. Arjuna, big round of applause. Woo! Arjuna, do you want to introduce yourself, please, my friend?
Well, I'm Arjuna. I'm a monk. I teach meditation. I enjoy writing. I just love helping people become more connected, which is which is good considering the topic of today.
Yeah, absolutely. And completely modest as well, because I heard about Arjuna well before I met Arjuna. So his reputation goes before him. So that's good.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Next up, Andy. Big round of applause for Andy.
Hey,
Do you want
thank
to
you very
introduce yourself,
much.
my friend?
Thank you, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Nazer, and for the last 16 years or so, I've been campaigning on and about the issue of loneliness. Most significantly, from 2015, I was an ambassador for the campaign to end loneliness, and then became the national campaign manager for the organization, and kind of was part of the group that took loneliness on that journey from being that furry thing in the corner that was, oh yeah, to where it is now, which has and is of worldwide significance.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm really pleased I got my kind of first choice pairing on this issue, because I believe that the approaches, the experiences, and the insights from both of these gentlemen are going to be really insightful when we're tackling each of these themes. Now, for the live audience here today, we're going to come back to the room at quarter to the hour and take any questions that you have. So please do save them up and we will make sure we get to them. If you are watching on the recording, if you want to ask any confidential questions, I'll also give you a place to reach myself, Andy, and Arjuna away from here as well, if you want to connect with us and that kind of stuff too. So let's kick off right from the foundations, right with the roots. Andy, let's go to you first. Identifying the root causes of loneliness in modern society from your perspective?
First of all, it's probably good if we just put under our belt what we're talking about when we talk about loneliness. At least for us, it's all going to be different. It's very personal.
Mm.
Um,
We were saying that
uh,
just before, weren't we? It's very subjective
it's
experience.
very
Yeah.
subjective, um, and my loneliness is not your loneliness. There will be different elements that we can compare to each other with, but by and large, it's different for each of us. And loneliness is also different from isolation, as it's different from solitude. And a lot of people kind of mix it all up because the language, sometimes the language is important and defining, what it is we're talking about. Because I would say the root cause of loneliness in modern society starts with social isolation and how people have become more and more isolated over the last 25, 30 years, and how that impacts. So that's recognizing that the measure of the social connections or the interactions that we have in our lives that we experience have got less and less. And there's all kinds of things go into that bag around social isolation with it. And you can start to take out all various elements. Oh, that's not the same as that, but what it comes down to is that we're just connecting less. We have less people in our lives. So, number one on my list, social isolation.
Thank you, Andy. You're coming to us, and thank you for doing this. By the way, you're actually working in Greece at the moment with the school through the kind of the European Union initiative on loneliness. From a student's or a young person's point of view, what would you say that their perspective is on loneliness? Because certainly in the audiences that I have in the student population, there's a big rise in the use of that word. And as you say, it does mean different things to different people, because they're going to be around people whilst they're saying this. But what do you think the student experience is, the young person experience of this is?
So I think it's very genuine. If you statistically, if you were to look at the polls and the research that's taken place in the UK, the youngest are the most lonely in society. I recognize that people are experiencing different things as we age, but I also recognize, as we go through that life course, that we are going to come across situations that whereby we are going to be on our own and we are going to have to face loneliness. And the
Mhm.
first occasions are when we're, in school and then going through into that higher education where people are for the first time in their lives literally on their own. Young people face a lot of different pressures than we did. And I'm trying to say that not from a kind of I'm an old man perspective, but I totally recognize that the influences and the pressures that they're facing are different from those that I had to face. But I think when I talk to younger people, I'm able to give strategies. I'm able to talk about the possibility of what they could do to help themselves reconnect. However, when I'm talking to people who are perhaps octogenarians and older, who are housebound, who can't leave the home, those strategies are far less. They're still there. We can still do something, but there's also a lot more closed doors than when we're younger. But that's not denigrating the experience of younger people with loneliness. It's there. It's very real. Maybe the definitions sometimes get a bit skewed.
Yeah.
Maybe they're talking about being alone, or maybe they're talking about solitude. But a lot of people in their younger life are lonely. Totally recognize that. And
Thank you, Andy.
I try and do my best to support them. Yeah.
Thank you. And Arjuna, I guess the same question to you. And the reason I did separate loneliness and isolation was because actually, and we'll also look at introversion as well later on. But actually, isolation to me is a really positive thing to an extent, and we'll come on to that. But I did want to separate off those words, and Andy made a real great point about subjectivity and different beliefs around what those things mean. But for you, I guess the same question to you: with the work, I say work that you do, the calling that you have, what would you say your insights are on the roots of loneliness in modern society?
Hmm. I guess I'm coming to it with a more kind of spiritual view, a more inner
Hmm.
view, a sense of because I was just reflecting on my university years, and that was kind of like the highlight in terms of having a big group of people around me in terms of close connections. For me personally, I would have said I was the least loneliest then. Moving to a new country and setting myself up again as being yeah alone but not lonely, and I
Mm.
think that's because of a deeper sense of yes, strategies in terms of connecting with people and groups and making yourself available and everything is great. But I also think that you can be lonely in a room full of people, can't you? You can feel isolated in the middle of the biggest city. And I'm just I guess my approach is in terms of a lack of something deeper, a lack of being able to sit by yourself freely. The person sitting on the park bench, did they have a phone in their hand, or can they just stare out at the vista and be okay with that?
Mm.
That's where I guess I'm coming to it from, is that sense of am I okay with myself? Can I be okay with the moment as it is? And I think that is definitely, I think people have lost the ability to be bored with
Yeah.
phones and things like that, and to appreciate just what is here rather than what they want next.
That's such a powerful point, and thank you for mentioning that. In fact, myself and Andy were having a chat away from here about kind of my work as a professional speaker. So, for example, heading up to Leeds after this. It's got 3 4 hours on the road.
Mm.
Then I'm going to be in front of people, and then there's going to be a lot of traveling again. I'm around people, but actually, actually pretty much on my own in that sense. So I do recognize that you can be amongst so many people, but you can also still be alone. I mean, we'll look at this in the next section. We'll just move straight on because I think it does link really well. One of the things that I noticed over the kind of the COVID years in that sense, and how that impacted the workplace. So I was kind of doing these kind of pulse surveys for people like contact centers and organizations and HR leaders. And one of the things that kept coming through towards the end of the pandemic was an increase in loneliness or a decrease in communication skills and an increase in social anxiety. And the two things that people really missed the most on this survey were commonality and community. They kind of lost the ability to have a connection with people. And that was the real main driver, apart from the fact you're a really nice guy, Arjuna, but that's the real main driver I wanted to have you in. I wanted to have that kind of spiritual conversation around this because it seems that maybe this is aligned with social media, maybe not. You tell me, but it seems that spirituality seems to be replaced by superficiality sometimes. So we get the feeling of connection without actually being connected, and that's certainly the reason why I left social media in May 2020 because I was connected but not connected at all. In fact, it was quite the opposite in that sense. What's been your experience with working with communities of all types? I guess when it comes to this.
Hmm. Well, I guess I don't know. Is the bottom.
No,
It's not a very good
that's a good
answer.
answer. I don't know so much. Yeah.
I, I think it. I think community is only as good as its members.
Hmm.
And surely that absolutely there's a point where the smaller trees lean on the more established trees, where the people who are looking for something, who are a little bit unsure of who they are and not feeling so comfortable in their own skin, kind of can lean on those who are okay in their own skin, or who can together transcend that internal dialogue that can be so vicious.
Mm.
That I'm not good enough, and I'm constantly, what do other people think of me? Um, but then there's the freedom of being secure, content in your own skin means that you can contribute. um, and 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 it's a curious thing when you don't need anything from anybody else you can fully enjoy everything that everybody else has to offer. And so, yes, a group of people can support the grow in confidence and social skills and in that intangible sense of connection and feeling part of something bigger than themselves. But at the same time, you got to put your roots down so that you can stand alone too.
Thank you.
And not need the people. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've defined introversion for myself as I recharge in my own company. So that's very much kind of my go-to to recharge my battery when I'm feeling low, is to just be by myself and to have that kind of experience myself. But there is, as I said, that tipping point. I was with my family yesterday and they were talking about kind of their works Christmas parties, for example, and I'm on my own. I have no works party. It'd be the smallest party in the world, kind of thing. There are certain elements of being in a workplace and actually being in a community that even us introverts would love to be part of as well. There has to be that kind of that connection, I guess.
Yeah.
There's a question that, or a statement that Douglas has put in the chat, and thank you for that, Douglas. People are seeking comfort, trying to find happiness. Do you see that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're so many people I talk to have that I have everything. I have everything that I aim for, but I don't have the thing that I thought it would give me. That feeling of satisfaction, that feeling of success. You look around and go, I'm materially successful, but I don't have that sense of fulfillment or purpose or comfort. Comfort in that thing. So.
Thank you. Andy, on this one, I wanted to kind of talk. You work in organizations and with people, leaders and stuff, and work in workplaces where you will see the impacts of loneliness and isolation, whether chosen or not chosen, and how it affects things like productivity. Have you had any experiences directly in line with that?
Oh, yes, lots. I mean, my work really over the last 5, 6 years has been in working environments. And I started off working mainly in the UK, but as it sounds odd, but as loneliness or the word about loneliness spread around the world, I've worked more and more abroad. But the issues are the same. We know that people who are chronically lonely, that's people who identify themselves as being always or often lonely, have impaired concentration, reduced productivity, absenteeism, lower creativity and problem solving skills. It impairs reasoning, emotional regulation. Of course, all this depends on the individual, and it also depends on the climate in which they're working. And I think over the last few years, and this is where some of the very big companies, and quite often you'll see if you look at Google up loneliness and in the workplace, you'll actually see the word Google. Google have kind of led the way and set the benchmark for other organizations to look towards. They've recognized just what the role is of the employer in the life of the workforce and have put measures in place to support people. I mean, it's not just about loneliness, it also crosses over into mental health as well.
Absolutely.
In your world, Nick, I mean, we both work on the lunch and learn circuit. That wouldn't have happened 15 years ago, wouldn't have been there. So people are doing, but nonetheless, they could do a lot more.
Yeah. And I want to talk kind of more generationally, Andy, with your work for the Campaign to End Loneliness. You worked a lot with the older generation, and you also very bravely shared your own experiences of things like loss and things that you've experienced along the way in a very brave way, I must say. I guess when it comes down to kind of connections and building connections, what insights or advice would you give to people of an older generation around building connections with people for support networks, I guess?
I think so, no, number one, and actually I say the same to people that are younger as well.
Yeah.
It's just take stock of those connections that you have in your life, and don't let go of them. A lot of people dismiss the fact that, oh, I haven't called them for a couple of years. Well, now's the time to call them. Because in 3 years' time they may not be there, or 2 years' time, or next week they may not be there. Make that connection. You'll feel better for it. Um, and I think it's also important that people experience quality time with their loved ones, and the people that they already have in their lives. Gratitude comes to play in this, recognizing appreciation. Um, I'm a big fan of active listening. Um, I did one of these panel things a couple of years ago with Ruby Wax, and she said the greatest gift that someone ever gave her was to listen to her. And I so get it. And so often people say to me, "Oh, it's great sharing, but quite often I'm getting the attitude of the person that's hearing." Well, being an active listener is it's a process and it's a skill, and you develop that skill, but it brings a lot of positivity to your life. I think it's also a suitable point to say that it's okay to be vulnerable and show that vulnerability, and to recognize that you're not perfect, the world is not perfect, none of us are perfect. Um, and opening up about our personal experiences, challenges, and emotions to deepen that trust is a way of doing so. Um, with older people, it's difficult because you can't necessarily, particularly if they're housebound, you can't necessarily give them the strategies, as I was saying, you can give younger people. So it's more, and a lot of their loneliness derives from social isolation. So it's about what can go into their world, because they may be in a place where they can no longer go out, or they have limited access to being able to go out. So then it's about recognizing that there are services out there. There are organizations, charities who are providing befriending. Befriending a really important, it's a highly significant volunteering role that's becoming more and more popular and more relevant as our population ages.
Mm.
There's things like, library at home service. Who would ever, I didn't know about library at home service until one day someone said to me, "Oh, I get my books delivered. The woman comes, we sit, have a cup of tea, and we talk about what's popular at the moment." It keeps the connection, and keeping those connections are the absolute essential on this. And a lot of people do give up, sadly, particularly when their peers start to perhaps pass away, or they're no longer available. I used to run a callings network on a Saturday where a group of six of us would phone each other in a circle, and then gradually, as we went through the pandemic, we lost two, one to a care home, one died, and well, I'm down to one now. It's just one of the original six. This is what we face with later life, unfortunately.
Thank
But
you.
there are ways through. There are ways of keeping connection. Um, it's a bit of a battle because the resources aren't there. Sadly, we've had a lot of rhetoric from the government. We have a government strategy. One of the things my colleagues and I worked on, put a lot of effort and a lot of time into that. But we haven't had a lot of action. We haven't had the money on the table to do a lot of the things that we would love to do.
Thanks, Andy. You mentioned Ruby Wax there. Actually, one of the books I tend to, because I travel a lot and drive, that I kind of listen to more than I read. But there's a great audio book by Ruby Wax, How to Be Human, which is a three-way conversation between Ruby Wax, a psychologist, and a monk. And it's a really fascinating conversation. And I'm sure that came up in that, actually, that I'm not good at verbalizing this yet, Arjuna, so you're going to have to bear with me because you're the man on this. But I'm not going to. I would say that there's been a line that I've used for many years now that it's it's a lot easier to give advice than it is to take your own.
Yeah.
And something that I've always said for a long time now is that actually we always look externally when we need help, but we never look internally. And over the past year, I've started to do that more. And you've mentioned this a couple of times already, that kind of looking internally.
Mm.
It's kind of like I'm tapping into the spirituality that I have that's always been there, but I've never really named it or kind of examined it in that sense. It's a really interesting thing. So I'm not new. I'm very new to speaking about this. In fact, it's the first time I've spoken openly about this at all. But it's been a really interesting journey to have that kind of self-discovery. It's allowed me to tune in to and read and listen to lots of different people talking about a spiritual revolution and things like soul boom that I love and all these kind of things that are going on. And it has really opened my eyes and actually built new connections that I wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise. So would you say that there's a big lesson in all of that in that for all of us, that we can look internally, and once we kind of work on ourselves, we actually start to attract new connections anyway by default? Or isn't it as easy as that? Have I just had a fluke?
No, I think so. I think whenever you did, I mean, I've recently kind of embarked on a. This is not related to an inner world, but running. I've entered some races, joined the running club, and made connections there. But I think with any area of interest, you develop, seek out, find people that seem to be on a similar wavelength, and of course with the sort of this discovering who you are and what that inner voice is saying, and your connection to something bigger than you, and all that stuff. It's the same thing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that only came from a really shocking loss. That it's it's actually quite true for a lot of people that I speak to, that through big events, even big destructive, brutal events, can come actually something really good, something really powerful. It's
I think that's the only time we actually wake up and pay attention, is when the
yeah.
universe slaps us around the face. When we get it too comfortable, we just carry on as normal.
The one thing I haven't quieted my mind enough to do yet is look at things like mindfulness and meditation, something obviously you're really passionate about. Um, what to those who are maybe new to the subject, and I still class myself in this as well, by the way, could you explain the power of mindfulness and the effect that it has on us, and maybe in connection with the topics today?
Well, I think you nailed it really when talk about changing your narrative. I think the opposite of mindfulness is mindlessness, is sleepwalking through life, and really paying attention to the stories that we're telling ourselves about ourselves and the world that we live in, and having the ability to make new choices, to tell different stories, to see. I mean, we label everything, and what happens when we change that label? What happens when there is no label? And all of that begins, that choice, that freedom of choice can only begin with awareness and just paying attention. Um, Andy said something about the power of active listening, and I think that's the greatest thing. Is not only being present in the moment, but offering the gift of your presence to the moment. I think we're become a culture of consumption, but we don't realize the power of our active presence. And I think that all those things are tied up in mindfulness.
Fantastic. So, for those who are new to meditation, mindfulness, are there any kind of, and absolutely do connect with Arjuna on this, by the way, but I mean, I guess for this episode, are there any things that people can try out, or little tips or tools that you have that people can, that are brand new to this, can start to implement?
Yeah, I think it's as simple as just gently paying attention, just
Hmm.
really noticing what's here, noticing your feet on the ground, the smell, the noises, seeing, just opening your eyes and seeing what's in front of you. Notice what the voice in your head is saying right now. um, Taking some slower, deeper breaths, just long exhales out the nose if you can. Slowing down, doing one thing at a time. Just all these kind of little things, being more grateful, looking out, not only noticing now, but seeing what you approve now. It can be easy to get in a little trap of noticing now and finding lack and what's broken and what's not good, but really just noticing hey, I like this, I approve of that, I'm enjoying this, and sometimes even gratitude can be such a big thing, and I need to feel this way, but it all begins with just noticing. So
I love that.
tuning in.
Love that. Do you have any audio recordings of yourself? Because you are amazing to listen to. I felt relaxed just listening to you, to be honest.
I do.
Good. I'll be looking that up afterwards. I think you touched on something really important there, actually, that very often there's a lot of areas of personal development, people become addicted to personal development, that it becomes actually quite an anxious pursuit. Oh, I can't meditate. I can't get my. They have this kind of pressure, and everyone wants you to do it their way. Every book you read, everything that you listen to, it makes you feel that if you don't do it this way, you're a rubbish human being. So therefore, it piles on the pressure for you to be able to relax, and it's tough. I love that you just simplified it and kind of bring it all back down.
Yeah, you don't even need to stop your mind. You can just notice that, hey, my mind is really busy right now, and that's all. It's as simple as noticing what is rather than what you think, trying to get to where you think you should be.
Brilliant. Love that. Thank you. I mean, we've spoken about community already by default, but the belonging element is something I wanted to talk about as well. There's some commonalities in the work that I do and you guys do, and also some of the guests here today, that the work that they belong to. Belonging is huge. I think it's the one commonality between sexuality, race, gender, mental health, mental illness, lots of different things, that to not feel belonging, to feel that you don't deserve to have a platform, to deserve that you have a voice in that sense. And I know, Andy, me and you have discussed this, and you've been to my Find Your Voice event. That's a big commonality for me, is that how we live and sometimes how we work, but we're given the theme today, how we live can have an absolute impact on our belonging and our right to have a platform, our ability to have a voice. And therefore we just become kind of pushed down and down and down, having an impact on self-esteem, impact on confidence. How much do you see with people that you help, Andy, when it comes to belonging, people that feel that they can't break out of the comfort zone that very often we can fall into ourselves?
Well, I think, and this actually links to what you were just talking about with Arjuna around mindfulness. I think before we can connect with others, we have to connect with ourselves. And I think we're living in a world now where people want the quick fix. They want to be able to remedy their problem. And a lot of people will, and I think along the way, I've been one of them, will be on that journey to find the place where they belong. I think there's a lot of people traveling around, looking. I enjoy these trips I take out into Europe just to see where the place is, what's happening there. Could that be my place? Is this where I'm going to fit in? Is this where I belong? I've spent a lot of my life, as I say, journeying around trying to do that. I think there's an awful lot of people in that same place, but that's also one of the reasons why so many people are disconnected, because they find themselves in the wrong place. I think it's not as simple as just a geographical move. I think it's about recognizing that contribution is important. If we are disconnected from our community, one of the surest ways to reconnect is to step forward and volunteer, become part of that community, recognize that there are people within that community that need a helping hand. And actually, years ago, I worked on a sort of political campaign around volunteering. I mean, I wasn't working for a political organization at the time, but we had this thing called Big Society, where it put an awful lot of people, it was about my square mile and volunteering within your square mile, where you see that your neighbors need support. And the pandemic kind of washed away a lot of that. There was a lot of damage done by Big Society. And we recognized during the pandemic that we didn't need permission to go and knock on our neighbor's door and ask if they needed help. we could go and do so. And permissions are very important because they hold us back. When in fact, people who experience loneliness, particularly older people who experience loneliness before the pandemic, actually felt more engaged during the pandemic, which is a kind of crazy situation because we were all concerned about how people were responding. I think community comes at a price. I think belonging comes at a price. You have to contribute. You have to find a way to give something back.
Mm.
And when we do, it's reciprocated. And we feel good for doing so. And others feel good for receiving as well.
Thanks, Andy. Purpose and was something you kind of mentioned there, and also alluded to the fact of having a focus. And I'm very proud of my dad. My dad decided to retire last year, and he's worked all of his life, and he's at full retirement. And actually, within about 6 months of fixing everything, realized that actually he wanted to kind of go back in a kind of a bank working kind of way of just kind of working the odd day. He's a care worker, so it takes it's very much a passion for him as well. I'm very proud of the fact that he kind of stood up and he said, actually, I don't think this is doing me any good. I haven't got the purpose and the focus that having that role in life brings me. And it wasn't a money move. It wasn't a job move. It was actually just helping another, well, actually a vulnerable adult in his case of how he helps people. That was big, but I know vulnerability, and the reason I wanted men is especially is because of both of your kind of backgrounds and experiences. I guess Andy first, vulnerability as a man, and even very often self-awareness, having conversations around how you're feeling. You also have come from the music industry many years ago, where actually it's that kind of real bastion of mask wearing in that sense as well, that you can have that kind of that performance persona that you don't show how you feel. What's your experience has been like as a man and being around men when it comes to mental health and vulnerability?
Well, I think perhaps we're in a place where the tide is turning, but it's turning out of necessity rather than desire. But I think we have to recognize and acknowledge that vulnerability can also be a strength. Sharing emotions isn't a weakness, but a vital step towards meaningful relationships. There's a huge stigma around mental health and also loneliness and sharing. But I think gradually we may be knocking that one back a bit. Certainly, when I first started, I tend to start when I do face-to-face talks. I ask people how many people have experienced loneliness, and originally you'd see 2 or 3 hands going up. Now most hands go up. They recognize that it's an entirely natural feeling, and perhaps the stigma, or perhaps it's that they've come to a talk about loneliness and they feel that they can talk about loneliness and their own loneliness. I'm never quite sure, but I think gradually we're chiseling away at all that stuff that was there that was stopping us from sharing. And I think also, it's quite interesting what you said about your father returning to work. I think we need to have some discussions about later life and about what our expectations are. And what your father faced is, I have heard so many times, the story of what you're going to do. When I ask what you can do when you retire, and it's we got a great garden, or, we love going on holidays, and we've got the grandchildren. And then you have to say, well, sometimes the garden's not so great in February, March. There may be things to do, but and then the holidays, fab, but there may come a point where you're not able to, I hate to be the messenger of doom, but this stuff happens, and grandchildren grow up. So having something there, I think, is really good. We're getting more. I recently started referring people into men's sheds. There are becoming older men's groups, or men's sheds where they make stuff.
Yeah.
They come together, they have a coffee, they talk about life, they talk about what's going on, and they make stuff together. And it's that together thing. It's that shared connection because shared enterprise, if you like, those shared interests build bonds. And yeah, that's where I'm kind of at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think, not going too much into this, but I think we all know how much of a challenge that male suicide is within the world. Sadly, it's
Absolutely.
sadly huge. Very often it becomes to that point of loneliness where they feel they have nowhere else to go, nowhere else to kind of reach out for help. Um, so I really appreciate this conversation about this. Arjuna, tell us about your journey to becoming a monk and the impact that it had on your life through going through that journey yourself.
Yeah. I just, hmm. Andy was talking, I was just wondering about just the role of a mentor or a guide or a teacher and all that sort of web of connection of having, especially an older man or men who's your board of trustees or who you can lean on. Because I think I just want, in terms of this whole loneliness, it feels like we have to do it ourselves, and maybe that's part of the problem. When we don't have the answers or we don't have that, what's the point? And having, especially men, senior to us, maybe in age, but definitely experience, who can guide and walk with us and joke with us and do all the things that men like to do, then maybe there's something about that. Because I think my journey in terms of becoming a monk was finding a teacher, and he happens to be an older man and Vietnam vet, but also successful businessman. Just how that sort of fuller picture of life that only age perhaps can give. And I guess that's what transformed me, was not only finding a sense of connection with them, being okay in my own company, knowing the voices in my head so well that I could laugh at the ones that were vicious, but having a guide who I could lean on too.
Yeah.
I think that's the way I would sum it up.
The point that you decided to actually, this is something I want to do, this is something I want to pursue, was it through purely just a new direction, or was there a challenge or an adversity you were experiencing that helped to overcome? What was that kind of that? I guess the catalyst for that, if
Yeah.
you don't mind me asking.
No, good question. It was very much like we were talking before, where I realized I had everything in my life materially. I had connections with friends. I had an incredible job and purpose. I thought it was purpose, and everything, on my to-do list was ticked. And yet that didn't equal connection. I was living in the place that I thought I could stand tall, and it was not the place. What I was missing was an internal place where I could stand tall. But I didn't realize that at the time. It was incredibly confusing because I think our culture says, get the things, go to the right place, meet the right people, etc., and you will feel fulfilled, successful. And I don't think that's the case at all. I call it the donut life. You can have the glamorous, sparkly, sprinkle covered chocolate donut, but there's often a whopping great hole in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
I guess the final question before we start to wrap up is that to each of you, really, what is kind of fulfillment to you? I guess what kind of we're looking at integration. What does fulfillment mean to you in your respective lives? So, what keeps you fulfilled? Andy first.
I think it's a number of things. It's not one. I think connection is a very important part of that fulfillment for me. I think recognizing that I can do what I want to do, and that freedom element is very important. And the people that I love in my life, having them close, being able to engage with them, being able to be myself, is very, very important. When we can't be ourselves, our lives are very limited, and very restricted. So being myself is very, very important to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. And Arjuna, same question to you. What is fulfillment to you?
I think it has two components. I think it's sort of an internal sense of the perfection. I had it all lined up. The perfection of the present moment. It's just being totally okay with who you are and where you are exactly as you are right now, without anything needing to change. And yet this sort of external sense of building something, maybe building a few things, being a part of something that's bigger than you. So both of those things, I think, are important for fulfillment.
And one question, well, an extra question for you, Arjuna. So, again, this is completely off script now, but it's something that's going through my head. It's kind of very often you hear kind of, I think it's Carl Sagan said, kind of the wounded healer kind of mentality. That how do you stay in a good place when you are helping other people? How do you go through life being that kind of that guide, that help to people while still protecting your own well-being as well?
Oh, I think just unconditionally giving without need. I think knowing when to say no as a form of giving as well. Just I think being guided more by general principles, but moment by moment by an internal sense of what's right and what's not right. So yeah, not needing protection at all, but being totally happy to go yes or no as the as the inner compass says.
Thank you. Any parting wisdom? Any final message for everybody here on the recording as well?
Yeah, don't be mindless. Life, as John Lennon says, life is what happens when we're busy making other plans, and don't do that all the time. Make sure you get your feet in the ground.
It's a big takeaway, actually. That I never thought the opposite of mindfulness it seems so kind of obvious now. So I'm really pleased you mentioned that. Thank you, Andy. Any parting wisdom for you, my friend?
Yeah, I would say to anyone that is experiencing loneliness, use it. Turn your loneliness into purpose. I think we need to recognize more that loneliness unites us all. It's a universal condition, as is the desire to belong. And also that most things in life reflect a decision that we've made. And if you want a different result, and if you want to opt out of the place that you're in, you can, but you have to work at it. It won't come straight away.
Thank you so much. Okay, so big thank you to Arjuna, big thank you to Andy for your insights here. So Andy, what's your website, email address if people want to reach out to you?
Yeah, well, the best way of finding me is just click on LinkedIn. That seems to be a universal resource.
Fantastic.
Otherwise, you can find me at andynazer.com.
Brilliant, thank you. Arjuna?
Yeah, I'm arjunaishaya.com. And yeah, email or Facebook or LinkedIn or or whatever.
Good stuff. So we're going to come back to the live audience for any questions now. If you're watching on the recording, or if you have a question that you want to ask confidentially, I'll give you a place to reach us shortly. For those who are interested and up in their game on the speaking side of things, come to our next Find Your Voice live event in Bristol, the next in the southwest of the UK. 31st of January is the next one. Also, our next Balancing Acts will be in December, and we're looking at bullying and young people with Paula, who's the CEO of Kidscape, and Helen, who is a solution-focused therapist as well. So that's going to be a really important topic to cover as well. So if you want to reach out to myself or to have a message to Andy, Arjuna, I can forward on to them. It's nick@nickelston.com. Doesn't go to anybody else apart from me and you and your panelist of choice. I am only on LinkedIn for the aforementioned reason with Arjuna's conversation. I am not on social media anywhere else. Not enough brain space for that. I am on YouTube, and also my podcast is now into season 7. So please do subscribe if you're looking for something new to listen to. Big thank you to the live audience for joining us here today. I'm going to come back to the room now.